South Africa is a land of breathtaking beauty, ancient civilizations, and deep cultural richness. But hidden beneath its mountains, oceans, and vast grasslands is a story filled with pain, struggle, resistance, and survival. This is the story of South African colonialism, one of the longest and most complex colonial experiences on the African continent. In this documentary, we take you through centuries of transformation, from indigenous kingdoms to European invasion, from forced labor to apartheid, and from the ashes of oppression to the rise of a democratic nation. Long before European ships touched the shores of southern Africa, the region was home to thriving societies that had existed for thousands of years. The earliest inhabitants, the San and Khoikhoi, were among the oldest peoples on Earth, carrying knowledge of land, seasons, and wildlife passed down through countless generations. Later, Bantu-speaking communities migrated into the region, giving birth to many of the cultural groups we know today: the Zulu, Xhosa, Sotho, Tswana, and others. These societies built complex political systems, traded cattle and precious minerals, and formed powerful kingdoms. Southern Africa was far from an empty wilderness. It was a land shaped by African brilliance long before outsiders arrived. Everything began to change in the late 1400s when the Portuguese first appeared along the coast. Bartolomeu Dias sailed around the Cape in 1488, revealing a new route to Asia. At first, the Portuguese were not interested in settling in the region. Their presence, however, marked the first wave of European intrusion that would later grow into full-scale colonization. The real turning point came in 1652 when the Dutch East India Company established a resupply station at the Cape of Good Hope. What was meant to be a simple refreshment stop soon transformed into a permanent European settlement. Dutch farmers, known later as Boers, began to seize land from the indigenous Khoikhoi people. They introduced European farming, brought enslaved laborers from Asia and East Africa, and set the stage for generations of conflict over land and survival. The Khoikhoi and San suffered devastating population losses due to foreign diseases like smallpox, and many were pushed into servitude. This moment marked the painful beginning of colonial South Africa. Over the next century and a half, Dutch influence expanded, but everything changed again in 1806 when the British took control of the Cape Colony. The British arrival intensified tensions between Europeans and between settlers and African communities. They brought new laws, abolished slavery in 1834, and imposed new systems of governance. Many Boers resented these changes, especially the abolition of slavery. Their dissatisfaction sparked one of the most dramatic episodes in South African history, the Great Trek. In the 1830s and 40s, thousands of Boers gathered their families and ox wagons and migrated into the interior in search of independence. This movement led to violent clashes with African communities, especially the Zulu under King Dingaan. The Battle of Blood River in 1838 became one of the most symbolic moments of the trek. As the Boers spread across the land, they established the Orange Free State and the Transvaal Republic. These Boer republics were built on systems that excluded and exploited indigenous Africans, turning African land into European-held territory. The region's destiny changed forever in the late 1800s when diamonds were discovered in Kimberley in 1867, followed by gold on the Witwatersrand in 1886. This triggered the mineral revolution, a massive industrial transformation that attracted thousands of Europeans and intensified British interest in the region. The British sought absolute control of this mineral wealth, which led to tensions with the Boers and contributed to major conflicts. The mining economy relied heavily on cheap African labor, enforced through taxes, passed laws, and harsh working conditions. The foundation of racial segregation was strengthened during this period, enriching Europeans while impoverishing black communities. The British also sought to expand their control over African kingdoms. One of the most dramatic confrontations occurred in 1879 during the Anglo-Zulu War. The Zulu, known for their military strength under leaders like King Shaka and later King Cetshwayo, delivered one of the greatest defeats in British imperial history at the Battle of Isandlwana. But despite their bravery, the Zulu kingdom eventually fell to British might, and its independence was destroyed. By the late 19th century, South Africa was moving toward full British control, and tensions with the Boer republics escalated into two major conflicts known as the Boer Wars. The First Boer War in 1880–1881 ended with the Boers defeating the British. But the Second Boer War from 1899 to 1902 was brutal beyond measure. Britain used scorched earth policies, destroyed farms, and created concentration camps where over 26,000 Boer women and children died alongside over 14,000 black Africans. This war ended with a British victory, laying the foundation for a unified South Africa under British authority. In 1910, the Union of South Africa was formed, merging the colonies and Boer republics into a single political structure. But this union excluded the black majority entirely. The new government institutionalized racial discrimination. One of the most devastating laws was the 1913 Natives Land Act, which restricted Africans who made up around 80% of the population to just 7% of the land. Families were uprooted, farmers were impoverished, and African communities were pushed into overcrowded reserves. Racial segregation became the backbone of the country's political and economic systems. Throughout the early 20th century, new laws tightened racial control. Africans were restricted from skilled jobs, forced to carry passes, and denied the right to vote. By the time the National Party came to power in 1948, the groundwork for apartheid had already been laid, but the party took racial segregation to a whole new level. Apartheid became one of the most extreme systems of racial oppression in modern history. It divided the population into racial categories: white, black, colored, and Indian. It controlled every aspect of life: where people lived, where they worked, and whom they could marry. Black South Africans were forced into homelands called Bantustans, which the government falsely claimed were independent nations. In reality, these were poverty-stricken areas used to deny black citizenship. Cities were reshaped through forced removals, pushing black families out of places like Sophiatown and District 6. Education for black children was designed to prepare them only for servitude. Families lived under constant fear of police harassment, arrests, and brutality. The pass system required black adults to carry identification at all times, making movement a criminalized act. Apartheid was not just separation. It was a systematic destruction of human dignity, culture, and opportunity. But even in the darkest times, South Africans refused to remain silent. Resistance movements grew across the country. The African National Congress, founded in 1912, became a major voice for liberation. The Pan-Africanist Congress, student movements, and labor unions organized strikes, protests, and campaigns. In 1960, the Sharpeville massacre shocked the world when police killed 69 unarmed protesters. The government responded by banning opposition groups and imprisoning leaders like Nelson Mandela. Despite repression, the spirit of resistance grew stronger. In 1976, the Soweto uprising erupted as students protested the use of Afrikaans in schools. The police opened fire, killing children, including 13-year-old Hector Peterson. The uprising sparked nationwide resistance and intensified global outrage. The world slowly turned against apartheid. Countries imposed economic sanctions, cut off cultural and sports ties, and supported liberation movements. South Africa became isolated, and its economy began to suffer. Internal resistance, international pressure, and the collapse of other colonial regimes pushed the apartheid government toward negotiation. In 1990, history changed forever when Nelson Mandela was released after 27 years in prison. His release marked the beginning of a new era. The following year saw intense negotiations between the government, the ANC, and other stakeholders, eventually leading to the dismantling of apartheid laws. In 1994, South Africa held its first democratic elections, and Nelson Mandela became the first black president. The world watched as a nation once torn apart by racial hatred began to build a future based on unity, reconciliation, and equality. But the legacy of colonialism and apartheid remains deeply visible in modern South Africa. Land ownership remains highly unequal. Economic inequality is among the highest in the world. Townships created during apartheid still suffer from poverty, unemployment, and limited opportunities. Racial tensions persist, and many South Africans continue to fight for social justice, land reform, and economic transformation. Yet despite these challenges, South Africa stands as a symbol of resilience. Its people, diverse in culture, language, and background, continue to create some of the world's most influential music, art, sports, and ideas. From ancient kingdoms to modern democracy, the journey of South Africa is a testament to the strength of a nation that refused to be destroyed. The story of South African colonialism is not simply a story of suffering, it is a story of courage, resistance, and triumph. It is a reminder that even the darkest systems cannot suppress the human spirit forever. If you learned something powerful from this documentary, make sure to like this video, share it, and subscribe for more African history content. And let us know in the comments, what part of African history should we explore next?